Welcome to Difficult Conversation Africa broadcast, a pioneering platform which attempts to raise, discuss issues many are afraid to face. I present to you the host, Yinka Olaito, a media communications development expert, author with about 2 decades experience in Africa and in the United States.
Hello and good day, viewers. My name is Yinka Olaito, your host on Difficult Conversation African podcast, on a platform where we raise issues many are afraid to raise, and such issues are pivotal to development. In this episode, we will be looking at dealing with African storyteller biases and narrative. Ideally, we African storytellers used to raise concerns about Western world storytellers were telling one single story. But we discovered that African storytellers, there are few biases that they are not controlling. So in this episode, we'll be looking at this. But as usual, let me give you the background of what we are trying to do. Humans have patterns, seeking brain, that feed off stories. We all have cognitive biases. These biases impact on the way we process information, think, and act. Often, these patterns deviate from rational judgment. Storytelling requires crafting a compelling narrative that captivates public interest and empathy. Not everyone is fully immune against biases and prejudice. Africa has hundreds of thousands of cultures, language. Story writers of African descent are shaped by these cultures and roots. This often subtly manifests in their worldview and perception of their next door neighbor or other that are far away. A number of African storytellers too have been seen in engaging narrative that resonate with preconceived local emotions, poised to stimulate listeners' imagination in a desired direction. Biases are disappropriate weights in favor of or against an idea of things, usually in a way that is inaccurate, close-minded, prejudicial, or unfair. African storytellers are human. Often the telltales are in the choice of the words in where those being created in the storyline. If Africans continue to raise issues about unfair and generalized narrative that position Africa as a place of background by the Western storytellers, how do we deal with biases and unbalanced narrative portrayed by African storytellers themselves? Today I have a guest, Lucy Chihanda, who will share our thoughts. Before we go ahead, let me introduce her. Lucy Chihanda is a co-founder, creative director of Two Sister Media LLC, an African female-owned business that is passionate about reshaping the narrative of Africa through different storytelling tools, giving the world a non-stereotypical, provocative, and positive lens in which to view Africa. She's also a seasoned writer who has been writing since the age of 9 and recently published a full adult novel called The World Is Ours in 2022. She has an award-winning podcast called Stories from My Hair that featured African writers in intimate conversations about their literary journey. Lucy is a multimedia creative, thought leader, and mentor with a passion to use her artistic expertise to contribute to the empowerment of African people on the continent and abroad. Welcome, Lucy Chihanda, to the platform.
Thank you so much for having me, Yinka. This has been great being invited to speak about my own experience, my own perspective concerning the narrative in Africa. I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you. Thank you and welcome. We go straight to the conversation. Why has neutrality been a difficult task for African storytellers who desire to create a balanced narrative. Maria Ressa once said, colonialism did not die, it only goes online. Can we attribute this to inherited divide and rule policy of the colonial masters?
In answering that question, I think I would like to go a little ways back. I would say that a lot of our bias, or a lot of the fact that we cannot be neutral, maybe has a lot, like you said, information bias and our cognitive biases are usually set from a very young age. When we grew up, at least when we grew up in the 80s, in the mid 80s, 90s, and even those who grew up earlier, we had a lot of information that came from abroad. For example, in our television, our newspapers, a lot of our news was filtered in from people that were trained by either Western leaders, Western thought leaders in the media, in all those aspects. So we grew up watching Western media, for example. And I remember that as a 9-year-old writing a story, I wrote stories about people who ate apples, and I talked about snow. These were things I had never seen. So in a way, all these sort of shaped my worldview of the West, made it seem like what we had was not as good as what the
as the other Western people has.
Yes, it made it seem like they were so novel and so fresh, and they lived on another planet, and I wanted to be that planet.
And we are living in a backward environment.
Exactly. As if snow has anything to do with being backward or forward, So so we had a lot of that. And if you notice, a lot of the generation of millennials, or even a lot of the generation between the 70s, possibly onward 60s, we grew up with the lens of seeing the world, or seeing Africa through the lens of imported
culture.
Yes. So we had this idea that, oh my God, we need to be as good as the West. And therefore, we viewed what we had as inferior. And I believe that that has affected the way in which we tell stories. It is only now, with the world opening up with a lot of information, plus the media, that we're beginning to have a more 360 perspective of how things run. But also, we're beginning to see more than ever that the imported information we had was really the West pushing their agenda and their PR. It's public relations. And they focused on showing themselves out to us, that they were great and they were amazing and it was perfect out there. But we as Africans did not have sort of the means, or even if we did, we didn't see the sort of potential, or even, think about having to import ourselves to them until movies started coming out that showed Africa in a different light, that now we're beginning to say, okay, I think there's something more in Africa. So neutrality has not really been a thing, because we allowed ourselves to be corrupted in that aspect. However, I feel, when you say neutrality, especially in storytelling, say journalism, for example, may have a clause of being impartial, but I do not find that it is completely impartial as a past journalist.
Yes.
Yeah,
because the issue of objectivity is still debatable.
Yes, because as a journalist, yes, we still showed Africa in a certain way. Plus, the lens in which we have been taught journalism is bad news sells, So Africa seems to be sort of like a fertile ground for bad news, and therefore we sell so much. We're going to talk about war in Congo, disease in Uganda, then money laundering in Nigeria, and everything happens in like Africa is the melting pot of all things bad, and somehow we ride on that because it's like a dopamine hit for the rest of the world when we say that Africa is in such a bad state. And yet I feel that is just
I understand your point. One thing that I want to raise, Lucy, is the fact that even our own culture and even our own acculturation as we grow up, the biases between the tribes nations, and there's a lot of misgiving about your neighbor in Africa that we all carried over as writers too. You think that is not that cannot affect this?
So the one thing I feel about biases and about literature generally, like unlike journalism where you're reporting facts and information, I find that
Okay.
I find that that written
Storytelling.
like storytelling is amazing because storytelling allows us to bend the truth or to tell the truth or to quote the truth in a way that we can swallow.
Mm.
And I feel like that's a very powerful tool that we possess as storytellers. Plus, I think that it also gives us the ability to check ourselves and to check our biases. I don't think that we will ever live without them, but I think being able to be aware of those biases is a great way that we can tap into with storytelling. So
I like the point you have raised. Being able to be aware. How many people are really aware
not many.
that they actually have the biases?
Not many. Many people think they don't have biases, but they do. For as long as we can say, oh, this tribe, they do this, or these people, they do that, that's already a bias. And if you realize that you have it, if you realize that you categorize people based on maybe their height, the shape of their nose, the color of their skin, right? Then you know it's a bias. The one thing about the biases we have had, though, is that we have turned it into comedy, especially with art. If you notice within Africa, when like say, for example, look at Trevor Noah, when he'll imitate the different voices,
That's true.
you end up realizing it's sort of like it's a friendly bub. It's sort of like he's saying, comedy tells us that, hey, you have a bias, but it's cool, it's funny. You know, can we laugh at ourselves about it? I think what we can do with the fact that we cannot completely eliminate bias is try sit at the table, accept that we have them, and try and embrace them in a more positive way. Say, just because you're different doesn't mean you're wrong or bad, but it means that we can use these differences to create stories that are more positive about each other.
I like that point that you raise, and it is really vital that we understand that as African writers too, we have biases, but we must come to the awareness so that we don't use it as a divisive tool among the writers. Now, how can African storytellers champion a balanced storytelling that is devoid of parochial and ethnic bigotry and stereotypical position?
You see, what I find about Africa generally is that we are so unique in a sense that 54 countries, so many languages, so our background is very rich, you know. We have people that look different. We all look so different, you know, from the lightest light to the darkest dark. We speak so many different languages. We have been mixed with so many other cultures depending on which colonial masters or which trade people came around through us. Our food is different. I feel like we are literally the bazaar of the world. Like the whole world comes, and we should be proud of that. We should be proud of the fact that everyone is in Africa. Literally, everyone in the world is in Africa. We should be proud of that. And because of that, we should see ourselves as a gift. And I think that if we start to see ourselves as gifts to the world, because we believe that the first people, the first humans came from Africa. If we start to see ourselves as a gift, first of all, we will have an esteem that is stronger than what we have now, and this will reflect on how we
have now.
Yes, and how we relate with each other and how we relate with the world. But it is so sad that we have the wars that we have, and you know, the things that we fight about based on race, color, you know, male, female, religion, all that. And I believe that if we sat down and we and as storytellers, and we started to tell stories that cut across these differences more and more and push them out there, then we would start to read this, because remember, our minds are shaped by what we read and the stories we see. But if we started to read different stories, hear different stories, see different stories about us, I believe that we could slowly start to inform and change our biases.
Lucy, thank you. You just raised some vital points, which was not part of the question that I already had in mind. But now you are hitting the nail on the head. That race, color, ethnic, and religion are stronger part of these biases, and it is showing in our use of word in our storytelling. Can we do anything about it?
To be honest, I feel that it's going to take a bit of time, and it's going to take some generations to change. The great thing about Africa, and I think our greatest advantage, is that we are a very, very young population. We're a very young continent, and I'm so glad that when you look at the younger, people from the age of 28 downwards, the younger population of people, they seem to have a very different mind view, or rather mindset, about how they look at life and how they look at Africa. The only thing I'm worried about is that their mind view has been shaped so much by the West, by what's imported from the West. And yet it's so weird that at the same time, we also have a burgeoning or rather Afrocentric sort of awareness within that. So there's sort of like a balance. There's a battle between the Western influence that's coming in because of new technology, but also the rise of Afrocentricity. So they seem to be embracing both of them. And I believe that maybe we run a higher chance of having these stereotypes slowly start to get erased. Yeah, slowly diminish with this younger generation, because they're the ones thinking the world is such a big place. The borders, the borders were created by colonialists. They don't really work for us. I can move here. I can marry whoever. I can do this. So they are beginning to see a world that is a lot more united, or an Africa that's a lot more united than the Africa that we kind of grew up in.
Yeah. That's what we have seen with the younger people. They seem to be questioning everything. And we hope that that urge to question everything will produce a balanced African that is better. Now, let's go to the third question. A major downside of storytelling is that it thrives on drama, emotional appeal, and liberation of creativity that occasionally allow for embellishment. Journalism embraces the truth, while fiction may allow a level of embellishment. How can African storytellers escape the trap of misrepresenting the truth or biases in bolstering their stories?
So like I said before, journalism is it's based on fact, but I mean, these days I'm not so sure if journalism is not far off from fiction.
No. Yeah.
It's not far off from fiction. And fiction, I feel like someone once said, fiction is sort of dresses the truth, So it's easy for us to take it. And
to have a mixture of the two.
Yes. But I feel that there are different aspects of say, like fiction. You say that fiction will embellish the truth. Maybe, but maybe not. I realize that a lot of fact can be stranger than fiction. When you look at different documentaries online, say about, things that happen, about serial killers, about families, about this and that, you realize that, wow, these are not even stories we tell in a fictionalized aspect because they just seem too far-fetched, and yet it's true.
Yeah.
So I feel that fiction has a place right now in society, and possibly always has, but more in Africa, because we have so many stories to tell. We have archetypes that have not even been tapped into. We have lore that has not been tapped into. And these are aspects that now we're beginning to tap into because the world has opened up to us. So I feel that where journalism has been very limited, in that journalism promoted the idea of, if a dog bites a man, it's not news, but if a man bites a dog, it's news.
Fiction writer and stories that are doing something different.
Yes, limited in the aspect of how storytelling is. We have also a world of creatives, and Africa is very creative, but people who are trying to tell the stories that probably the news has told, but they're trying to tell it in a way that is slightly embellished so that we can take it in, so we can swallow that pill. But I feel that in the way that we should do it, we should be able to give the solution to the problems. If I'm going to write about, say, what's happening in Sudan, a story based on Sudan, I wouldn't want to leave it as painful and gloom and doom as it is. I would want to end it on a good note, with a note of hope. I think that we need to now start telling stories that say this might be happening, but guess what? There is hope. It's not the end of the story. And that's where our storytelling needs to go, just as much as our journalism too.
Yeah, maybe solution journalism is also tending towards that, because oftentimes when they present the facts, they are also trying to offer a solution and hope, challenging readers and news consumption also to be hopeful. Maybe that's we can find a balance between a storyteller and journalism in that regard. Now, the next question, Lucy, is this. Sometimes our biases are a product of confirmation and preconceived opinion, where we think that we're already looking for the truth that we have held. And then what we now have is a confirmation biases. Like I already told you, I know this is so, because you are already briefed by your grandfather that this African nation is this. For instance, let's look at South Africa and some other names. They talk about xenophobia, a small misbehavior by a fractional part of it. Your confirmation biases other Africans to say, I already told you so. South Africa, xenophobic. So how do African writers and storytellers deal with confirmation biases?
So I'll start with saying something. Living in the US, even when I just came to the US, every time I said I was from Uganda, do you know what they asked me? Oh, tell us about Idi Amin. Everyone was asking about Idi Amin.
You see what I mean?
Yes. So
I know.
It was the narrative everywhere. And then I realized one thing. I realized that this narrative had been pushed not only by the West, okay? It had been pushed
by the Africans.
It had also been pushed, like the Africans had enabled it. They hadn't said anything against it. So this has become a narrative that is pushed. And therefore, what happened is that the West decided this story sells.
Amplify it.
Yes, this story sells, let's amplify it. So the storytellers, and I think this is something I found was a problem when I was publishing my book. I realized that a lot of the writers, a lot of African writers, as much as they would want to say something different, they were trying to dance along to the beat of the West and the narrative that was accepted, which was a narrative of Africa, a narrative of confirmation bias, a narrative that we are we're not in a good place. We are 100 years behind the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And therefore, this is the information we need to keep talking about. We were constantly beating that dead horse. So the gatekeepers of storytelling would alter the stories. They'd be like, no, I think you should tell it this way. I think you should do it this way. I think this is how we want the story to go. And because you're going to get a check, because the West is paying you, you're going to get paid for it, and you're not going to get anything within the African populace. Therefore, you go ahead and say, you know what, it doesn't hurt. After all, I'm taking care of myself. And I think, so I think the problem is very economical, and we are selling out. We're selling out for a check, and therefore we're continuously perpetuating the negative narrative because we're going to be paid. We have mouths to feed, and I totally understand that. But I think that it is time for us as African storytellers to start creating, because there is a gap in the industry, we need to start creating opportunities for writers to start speaking their truth, start telling the truth about Africa, and also paying them. That's what we're not doing. And yet we're losing so much money yearly, annually, from the negative stereotypes that are being put out about Africa.
Yeah. I like the point that you raised, that we are selling out to paycheck. And I think that it's something that should become a conversation that Africans should begin to think about. Should we continue to sell out a paycheck? The other point is, if you are not, nobody want to be hungry today, and therefore paycheck is vital. But how do we create the balance? Anyway, let's go to the other question. How can increase awareness and neurodiversity, that is acknowledging the difference in brain function, attitude, or as normal and okay, help eliminate biases? I've just tried to define what neurodiversity means for you. That is acknowledging the differences in brain function, attitude is normal and okay. Meaning that Africa should come to the conclusion that even within Africans, even we are different, but there are a lot of things that bound us together. How can we use that to eliminate the biases?
I think that we're actually doing it now with platforms like yours, with platforms like Africa No Filter, with social media, so many young people online. We're basically in different pockets trying to show that we're the same, even though we're different, and trying as hard. And like I said, it's not going to take one day, one night, if someone's grown up knowing something. But also, I think that we have to start concentrating our efforts in other parts of Africa. I mean, there's the urban areas, the rural areas, but everyone needs to be aware. I think we need to create awareness. Yeah, we need to involve our governments. We need to involve sections of our governments that are able to create these programs, even in schools. But I think that, for example, in our history classes, instead of teaching us so much about the West, I think it's important for us to learn about the different sectors within Africa so that we build certain pride in who we are, pride in the fact that we came from, say, certain tribes and we've spread out across the world, and then we're able to sort of change our chemical balance about what Africa really is, and saying, oh my God, we're actually the same in so many ways, although we're different. But it starts with a form of education, and it needs to be instilled in our syllabuses in schools by our government. So I think that private and public sector needs to come together in order to work around our biases.
Well, thank you for that vital point that you just made. History. Unfortunately, history is being eliminated from curriculum from the basic school up, particularly here in Nigeria. History is taken out now from the curriculum. And so many are not aware, and they do not know as they grow up. So they don't know the differences, and it's difficult to actually appreciate the other tribe, other nation, and all that. But I think we will have this conversation, a part 2 of this again. Lucy, I want to say thank you for bringing such an insight into the conversation. Some of the things that you have stated that I really love is the fact that Africans need to begin to think beyond the paycheck and selling out. We also that our governments and history need to be part of what we are growing up with, and many other insights that you have shared. I'm so glad to have young people like you who are still pushing beyond the barrier, and that we can all continue to work together to ensure that African storyteller, or wherever they may be, whether they are in the Western world but of African descent, we need to begin to deal with our biases, because we cannot continue to work with biases. We cannot continue to challenge the Western story writers, journalists, and all of that to say that they are writing a single story while we are still amplifying the same thing. It is time for Africans to wake up and to begin to tell a story that is balanced and that is devoid of biases. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, our listener, for this session. I believe I will bring this young lady, Lucy, back again because of our time for now. Thank you, everybody, and see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. For inquiry, please send an email to info@difficultconversationafrica.org. Telephone 0809 3160 591. Please follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Difficult Conversation Africa. See you soon.